What's up, my freedom fighting friend? Should parents be able to give children puberty blockers that create irreversible changes in their body? Irreversible being the key word. Should parents have that freedom, or do you consider that child abuse? That's the topic of today's video. We're going to take a look at Candace Owens discussing with a couple people this very concept. Does it help children? Even if it does or doesn't, should parents even have the right? I think it's a very valid question. If parents should even have the right to do this, because hey, I'm a freedom person. I love freedom. I love the freedom to do stupid things. I love the freedom for people to be able to parent their children the way they want to, in a way they feel is in the child's best interest. But then there comes a line where I don't feel as though parents should have the right to abuse children, no matter what. So we start to look at, all right, chalking children full of puberty blockers, is that abuse or not? So Candace Owens, she's awesome. She raises a lot of interesting questions about a lot of stuff in the world. In the video we'll take a look at, it's about an 8-minute clip where she's sitting down with two people, Perez Hilton, who's kind of like an obnoxious media personality, and I don't know why she's sitting down with him, but she's like he has a very different perspective than hers. And then also in the conversation is a person named Scott Nugent. I don't know if it's a man or a woman. I know Scott Nugent, I call him a he because Scott was in What is a Woman, the documentary with Matt Walsh. Scott was born a woman, and biological woman said, hey, I want to go through gender transition, went through it and had absolutely horrendous experiences with the medical side effects. And now, as like someone who's gone through the transition process of being trans, Scott is someone who's on the scene speaking out against doing this to children, because Scott has this experience and says, y'all don't know what you're doing. This is not okay to do to children. I know because I went through it. All this glorious stuff you see in the propaganda, that's not the full picture. So let's take a look and you be the judge. Is this okay to do to children if they want it and the parents want it, or does it cross the line of child abuse? Take a look.
I do want to harp on this one point because it's very important. It is a lie to suggest that, and I'm not blaming you for this lie, by the way, to suggest that it's just reversible. It's a very dangerous lie, right? There are extreme consequences of going on puberty blockers. It's not like you just pausing a YouTube video and you can come back and say, okay, now I want to watch the rest of the video. That
to me is so important to acknowledge when we look at the indoctrination that's happening to our children. It's one thing like, yeah, Johnny, you want to dress up as a princess? Cool. You can take that dress off anytime. You can dress up like a princess for 3 weeks if you want to. Then if you outgrow that phase, it's very reversible to take a dress off. But you're screwing with someone's hormonal system. This is objectively irreversible, says people who are smarter than me, which makes sense to me.
Once you have skipped puberty, you have skipped puberty. The consequence can be, if you're a boy and you skipped puberty, you would have literally a micro penis.
That's going to be my excuse with my wife from now on. It's like, babe, I did puberty blockers, and don't hate me because of that. Small penis joke.
You can become infertile. You cannot experience sexual pleasure. These are lifelong decisions that are being made by adults who I think are well-meaning. I don't think, Maren Morris wants to harm children, but it is very dangerous when she is using an opinion that people are taking in as facts, when they actually believe that their children are going to be rendered happier because of all of this. No child can decide for themselves whether or not they want to have children long term and say, I'm willing to forego this. They don't know that. That's not the information that they're being given when they go to the doctor's office. I also think it's dangerous to assign meaning to what children say. Children have a different idea every single day. Are you actually gender dysphoric, or are you just a child? Do you want to be Spider-Man today? Would you support?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be Batman. I wanted to be a professional wrestler, wanted to be a cowboy. I'm very grateful my parents didn't get me Batman reassignment surgery. So I grew out of that. And even though we haven't heard any responses yet to Candace's position statements. I really appreciate her points because children can't decide for themselves about things that are little things like, cool, do you want broccoli or do you want Brussels sprouts? That's a very appropriate decision for a child. But someone who's all about freedom, part of freedom is realizing children are innocent and uninformed. And there's a reason why God gives children parents. It's to do a job for the children that they can't do themselves until the child develops the ability to do that job for themselves. So there's a spectrum of protection and sovereignty you give a child. The younger they are, the more protection they need, the less sovereignty they get. And as they get older, that starts to inverse. So now they're like 18. They need a lot less protection. Why? Because they've grown that ability mentally, physically, and emotionally to do that for themselves. So their protection from parents, the needs go down and their sovereignty goes up. So Candace is talking about young children who don't have. It's very healthy for a child to not know how to make healthy decisions for themselves that are in their best interest. God knows that. That's why God gives children what are called parents. It's kind of like we don't know how to make protein, fats, carbohydrates, minerals ourselves. That's why God gives us plants. We take in something from the outside to give ourselves what we can't give ourselves. So that's an analogy. Go on, Candace.
A scenario, and I always think of this scenario because I babysat, where I had a little girl who legitimately came to me crying and said she was a mermaid. Like she did not want to.
Get that mermaid some water and make sure she's always going to be a mermaid because she thinks she is now.
Go out of the bath. Would you view it as responsible if I said, yes, you are a mermaid and you can sleep in the bath from now on, and now I'm going to take you to get procedures to have scales sewn onto your body? Would that sound absolutely insane to you for me as an adult to do that?
I will share what I think and my understanding of being a conservative.
How his answer isn't just, yeah, that would be crazy. How his answer isn't just that, I don't know.
You don't want other people telling you how to parent. And that's what I'll say. I mean, if...
That could be a defense for child abuse, though, right? I don't want people telling me how to parent, but I don't want children abused ever. That's
a pretty interesting point. I don't want people telling me how to parent my children. I say that. But Candace says, well, a child abuser will say that too. Most good-hearted people know we have laws for a reason. The definition of freedom is you do what you want to do. You accept the consequences as long as your freedom does not infringe on other people's freedom. The moment it infringes on other people's freedom, that seeks being freedom and starts being tyranny. You have the right to freedom, not the right to tyranny.
I don't want children abused either, but your perception of abuse might be different than my perception of abuse.
Isn't that funny? Like, I identify beating a kid as not abuse. It's like, this is actually defined by law here, buddy.
That's very dangerous. That's a very dangerous.
So why should your perception have to do with her kids and her perception have to do with your kids? Why don't you parent your kids and you parent your kids?
Exactly, absolutely.
Walk away.
I think that walking away from that is very dangerous, and I will tell you why. We're talking about abuse, right? So I would not be comfortable with this argument if we were in the court of law and somebody said, hey, you've just been beating your children for 8 months and locked them in a basement, and someone said, let me parent my kids, or hey, you're a man, you've been raping your child, for the last 10 years. Let me parent my kids. There are truths and there are untruths, and to me, it is a truth that having your child undergo transition is a form of child abuse.
I missed that.
That's your opinion. But also, I feel like, this is why we're here today. In the world out there, the amount of gender dysphoric young people that are going through any medical intervention, it's not that many.
That's not true.
It's an interesting point. It's not that many going through medical gender transition. I think it's a lot, but even if it was 3, this is still a valid point. Valid point as in the sense of it deserves discussion. Because you could say, well, there's not that many people beating the crap out of their kids. If it's 300,000 or 3, it matters.
Would you have numbers?
That's not true. That is not true.
I don't have numbers. I'm not going to share, but
I do. Would you like to hear them?
It doesn't matter to me.
No, but it should, because you're saying something, right? So like we want to get to the truth here.
And then we'll share it and cite it.
So there was.
How can you not laugh at that? Like, sure, share it and cite it. It's just like you got to laugh at attitudes like that.
There's a study that was done in the UK. Within a 6-year period of time, there was a 4,000% increase. There was another study that came out in Texas just a couple of months ago that mirrored the same 4,000%. So we have a 4,000% increase within children that are medically transitioned. If you take that 4,000% increase and you take what is made over a lifetime with synthetic hormones with these children, it's $1.3 million if you start a child at 14 and that child lives to 80 years old. That's $1.3 million. We're not talking about all the medical.
But what I'm getting at is the amount of children or teenagers doing this. I don't think it's hundreds of thousands.
It's funny, like Scott, the person in the middle, says, to Perez's original thing, well, it's not that many going through medical transition. He's like, well, actually, it's a 4,000% increase. And Perez's response is, well, it's not that many. Well, whatever amount it was, it's a 4,000% increase, which for me raises this question. Why is there a 4,000% increase in children undergoing medical transition? Is that because they feel as though the world is a safer space and there's always been this many children wanting to? Or is it because children are being indoctrinated to escape pain and insecurities by projecting their self-identity outside of themselves onto, in this case, a different gender, and trying to be that so they don't have to be the person that feels all the insecurities, which is pretty normal for a child to do, pretty normal for a child to try to escape insecurities rather than knowing how to deal with them head on in a vulnerable, compassionate way. I don't know. It's a valid question. So is it a safe space, creating the right environment for all these people to say like, yeah, this is, or is it indoctrination, encouraging people, intentional or not, encouraging children to seek a trans identity and go through medical procedures as a way of validating that identity? I don't know. I'm just asking questions.
It might not even be more than 10,000 a year, to be honest. I don't know.
Oh, he's just like, it might only be 0. I don't know.
Oh, I'm not going to share a number that I don't know. But if I had to guess, in the United States, the amount of teenagers or pre-teens that are having any kind of hormone intervention, in the thousands, I'm guessing.
Okay, well,
and how many hundreds of millions of people, and how many teenagers are there in America? Countless millions.
Okay.
So what you're saying is that
let the parents parent their children.
So you are fine now that you've been given the facts of how this. By the way, these are the effects that have happened to somebody who did this as an adult, right?
Yes, and
we are
look at Caitlyn Jenner.
Right.
Caitlyn Jenner would share a very different experience.
Right.
Caitlyn Jenner won the Olympics as a man. And your child will too if they go through this medical transition.
She's transitioned now for
Caitlyn has spoken out about the depression that Caitlyn faced post-transitioning and things of that nature. But I do want to say this. You are now armed with more facts. We are telling you that this can render someone infertile. This can render somebody with...
Well, like I said at the very beginning, it wouldn't be my first go-to. But what would you... It's okay.
It's not about first go-to.
Okay. If you're a mother of 2 in 15 years, 12 years, if your child says, continues, not once, obviously, if your child over a period of months says, I'm going to kill myself.
I just told you that's
if I don't do this.
That's not true.
Well, let me ask the question.
Not true. Cite the study on that, because that is not true.
So there's an interesting argument that Perez is embodying, the argument for why children should be able to go through any kind of medical transition And that's, the argument is because they'll kill themselves if they don't. And if you raise questions about the trans ideology, you are literally killing people. And I don't think it's a very valid argument, because there's a lot of statistics, and I'll sound like Perez here for a second. I can't cite the exact numbers because I don't have them in front of me, but I've seen very compelling statistics that show the suicide rate of trans people. It's alarmingly high, but the suicide rate of trans people who go through surgery goes significantly up. So the idea of, well, they'll kill themselves if they don't get the surgery, unfortunately some do. And unfortunately after surgery, more do. So the question I consider is, are they suicidal because they feel like they're in the wrong body? Or do they want to change bodies because they're suicidal? Does the suicidal, whatever the trauma is that has caused that unfortunate and compelling for them to think about taking their own life, did that come first? And if so, the idea of a suicidal person saying, I need to mutilate my genitals, I need to go through these hormonal changes, I need to go through this irreversible surgery, or else I'll kill myself. A suicidal person, by definition, is mentally unstable. They need help, and I feel for them, and I want them to get help. But someone from a mentally unstable place telling you what will be their solution, that's usually not accurate because they're in an unstable place. So, if that was my child, first off, I can't imagine that situation, but if it was my child, what I would want to do isn't, okay, you say you should cut your junk off, cool, let's do that. I say, dear child, you were suicidal. We need to get you help at the deepest core mental and emotional levels, first and foremost. I could almost care less about what you do to your body, but what you do to your body, it's not going to heal this pain inside of you. The suicidal person, they need deep mental and emotional help. The genitals, that's not your emotions. That's not healing the root cause of this, in my opinion. Does that make a little bit of sense? I don't know. That's just how I look at it.
I'm just asking the question.
A whole generation of children, because you just said that, and you are fundamentally wrong.
In your opinion?
No, it's not an opinion. It is not an opinion.
My question was directed to Candace.
That is not an opinion. All 7 studies that said that. No, it's a retraction on 7 studies.
Okay.
You cannot say that and have it true. The odds of those kids committing suicide will happen to 7 to 10 years after. You want to talk about facts and feelings, we'll do it. But don't say these kids are going to kill themselves.
I didn't say that.
The odds are they will.
Okay, so
after
they're presenting.
I said.
So Scott was pretty emotionally charged there. But the gist of what I picked up is the odds of them killing themselves 7 to 10 years after surgery or puberty blocker intervention are significantly high. In other words, what the studies show, and what Scott was so passionate about, is using the medical transition as a way to prevent suicide, unfortunately doesn't work. It'd be cool if it did, but unfortunately it doesn't work, and it shows suicide rates actually go up after that. So one could actually maybe raise the question, does medically transitioning people cause more suicides? It correlates, but does it cause it? I don't know. But it's an interesting question in this topic.
If a child tells you over the period of months,
will you take them to the hospital and you have them seen for suicidal ideation?
Amen.
Right. I would not put them on something that I know is going to long-term give them real suicidal thoughts because they've realized they can't go back and their parents have assigned, truth to what was just a feeling, right? It is my opinion that there is no such thing as transitioning. Yes, you can medically castrate yourself. Yes, you can get a bunch of cosmetic procedures. At the end of the day, you can't just transition to be a man or to be a woman. I am a woman. I can, there are things that women can do that men cannot. And because I have looked into this issue and I've spoken to people that are being silenced, there are so many people like Scott that are coming out and saying, listen to my story. early onset osteoporosis, people's bones. I mean, could you imagine your bones deteriorating?
Which, by the way, for every ounce of like, hey, medically transition, it's a good thing. If people truly had children's best interest in heart, if the media, if Disney, if they had children's best interest at heart, for every ounce of like, hey, this is actually really cool, like medically transition, every ounce of that should be balanced out with an ounce of someone like Scott who says, hey, I did it and I regret it. Here's why. Here's why I see it as a problem. Presenting both sides to the child, which, by the way, the child can't make up their mind on this, but presenting both sides to the parents and protectors of the children, that is what would create a much more balanced scenario for true rational-minded decisions that are in child's best interest to take place.
Boys.
Yeah, for a child, for boys. If you go on these hormone blockers, right? Not being able to have children, that's a big...
But it also goes back to what I said a minute ago. I don't know the number, but I'm guessing it's not that many young people.
What do you mean when you say, like, what do you expect, I guess, the reaction to be if you go, well, it's just not that many people? Does that somehow justify Maren Morris signaling that this is just an LG? Because it's not. To me, the T issue should be knocked off. LGB, you're talking about a sexual preference. When you're talking about transitioning, you're talking about medical procedures. You're talking about castrating children.
Some trans people don't have medical intervention.
But we're here discussing children, because you and I disagreed about the children.
Yes.
Right?
What
There we have it. The rest, that's a small clip taken from some of Candace's exclusive content that can be found on the Daily Wire. I think Candace is awesome. But I was interested in taking a look at that with you as a snapshot of a lot of the sort of narrative arguments for, really emotionally charged, or arguments for why this is only a good thing. We should never question it. And you are literally abusing children if you prevent them from permanently altering their bodies and life trajectories. I think it's very interesting to take a look at, because the arguments, in my opinion, don't have much meat behind them, as evidenced by the quick emotional smears, that they get hysterical and then smear you. You're transphobic. So I appreciate Candace's very, I think, well-intentioned and I think well thought out questions and thoughts that she bounced off someone, Perez Hilton in this case, who I think really embodies the narrative talking points. So pretty interesting to see. And when I look at this specific conversation as a micro expression of the macro of what's going on in society, I think it's pretty accurate, because Perez Hilton in this case, I don't think he stood up very well. It's just sort of backpedaling, and you ask him a question and doesn't have a good answer, so he starts, kind of changes the subject, doesn't answer the question, but says, well, what about this? What about that? Are you saying this? And I just think it's a pretty accurate snapshot of what goes on. And ultimately, I think what's going on in society as a whole isn't in children's best interest with all the gender ideology. And I think, the warrior spirit that Candace has, I feel that in myself to protect children. And I think more and more parents are on the same page of wanting to protect children and actually seeing medical transitioning processes for children as child abuse. I see it that way, but the question is, do you see it that way? Curious your thoughts in the comment section below. And does this deserve to be regulated as a law? Like, hey, this is actually classified as child abuse, just like, yeah, you have the freedom to parent, but you don't have the freedom to abuse your children. Should this be classified in the same way as violence towards children? Let me know your thoughts, and thank you for sitting with me as we ponder the philosophical discussions here that are unfortunately inundating our children. It's something I think about. It's something I wish I didn't have to think about, but it's going on in the world. I have a child, and there's nothing that matters in my life more than my child. And if you're a parent, I'm guessing you're the same. So with that said, I think part of staying free is staying aware of weaponized morality, things that we're told are in our best interest, that actually aren't in our best interest. To be free sovereign beings, we have to recognize the invaders. Just like our bodies have an immune system, we recognize invaders. Hey, they might look good on the outside, but if we let them in, they can wreak havoc. But I think a good psychological immune system with an awakened person can recognize it and say, nope, not on my watch. I see you're trying to be moral, you're trying to virtue signal all of this, but guess what? You're a pathogen. Not on my watch, not with my children. Get the fuck out of here. Stay free, my friend.